Hello everyone, welcome to Academy of Civil Services. And throughout these video programs, we would like to give you some important current affair topics which are relevant to our prelims examinations. And you know that the last 1.5 years of the current affairs are relevant for the preparations. And we would like to help you throughout these video sessions, which some topic were discussed frequently in the news, and those topics were in the major discussions and that are related to our syllabus like economy, polity, geography, and history, and including the science and technology, ecology, environment. So those topics will be discussed throughout this video session. And please stay tuned with us, and we'll help you to assist your preparation better. And we have heard about many editorial and many articles, many discussion, political debate about why Russia is attacking Ukraine, why Russia is targeting the Ukraine, why Russia was invading this Ukraine. This intention was discussed many times in these particular articles. In many of the Hindus and Indian Express and other TV debate also discussed about why the Russia is invading the Ukraine, why there was a war between, why there was a conflict between and Russia, Ukraine. The basic reasons behind this conflict between the Russia and Ukraine is with regard to the expansion of the NATO towards the Eastern European regions. That when we go back to the map of the Russia, you can see that it is almost the border with the Eastern European countries. So all these Eastern European countries share border with the Russia, or they are part of the old Soviet Union after the post-World War. That way we have heard about the Cold War. How many of you have heard about the Cold War era? Like the post-World War, there was a context of the Cold War between the one side, it was the Allied powers, the US, which is led by, and another one was the Soviet Union. So some of the countries in the Eastern Europe was the former Soviet Union member or part of the Soviet Union alliance. Or in today's, they are the border countries of the Russia. But some of these countries are becoming the members of the NATO, like the Romania is part of the NATO, Poland is a member of the NATO. Now, the Ukraine is also interested to become a member of the NATO. That was the debate was going on in this context. So the Ukraine was interested to join in the NATO Council because they have said that they have an independence policy to decide whether they want to join with the NATO or not. So they have like shown an interest to the NATO members, and US was also so happy, and other NATO members was also so happy. But Ukraine till now not a member of the NATO, but they have shown an interest to become a member of the NATO. It has an effect in the security context of the Russia, because if all the bordering countries of the Russia, if they are becoming a member of the NATO, then the NATO assistance, especially in the field of military, will be given. So with the assistance of the NATO, it will affect the security of the nation, security of the Russia. So that's why Russia is opposing any country in that border with Russia, especially the Eastern Europe, joining with the NATO. That way, they are also opposing the Ukraine membership to the NATO. And that's what the political debate came in this context, and Russia was like attacking, or Russia was against this Ukraine, and it was considered as a diplomatic failure in those contexts. As well as every nation in the world is opposing the context of like coming of any war between the two nations. In order to ensure peace and security, every nation should maintain that peaceful coexistence, a friendly relations, which is our India's foreign policy, which is also dominated for ensuring the peace and security, which is our one of the fundamentals of our constitution under DPSP in peace and security, the liberal principles. Like that, all the countries were demanding for ensuring a peace in the region, but there was, because of these political and security angles, there was an opposition from the Russia for becoming the Ukraine to becoming a member of the NATO. That was the context this issue has started. So that the NATO, like the Ukraine, was interested to become a member of the NATO, but NATO is not confirmed its membership, and it has affected the internal security or the security of the border of the Russia. And it is again, there was an agreement between the Soviet Union and the NATO that they will never expand to the eastern area. They have agreed with the Russia in the earlier times during the Cold War. There was a Warsaw Agreement, and the NATO, the both of them agreed that the NATO will never expand to the Eastern Europe. That will affect the Russia's security. That's why the Russia is opposing these things when Ukraine is interested to become the member. And you can see that in 2014, and there were some rebels in the Ukraine region, especially the eastern part of the region. There are some rebels who are also supporting to join Ukraine with the Russia. With the support of the rebels, they are backed by the president of the Russia, Putin. And they, in 2014, there was a conflict between the two nations, and they have annexed one of the region which is near to this Azov Sea, the Sea of Azov or the Black Sea. The Crimean provinces was annexed by the Russia in 2014. So this again, some sort of a fighting between the two nations has triggered in 2014, and Russia was part of this, like the G8 nation at that time. But after that, this annexation of the Crimea, the Russia was suspended from the G8, and later it was known as G7 countries. And now you can see that the NATO, when Ukraine is saying to become a member of the NATO, the Russia will never agree with that. So that's why the Russia want this Ukraine, if it is coming to member or approaching the NATO to become a member, Russia will definitely attack this Ukraine. That's why it has triggered the Russia, and they are attacking the Ukraine now in order to leave their interest in joining. And finally, you have seen that the president of Ukraine said that we'll never, now we have decided to not become a member of the NATO. We are ready for the peaceful dialogue with the Ukraine or the Russia. So now the Russia and Ukraine are ready to talk in the peaceful manner, and most of the regions are now captured by the Russia. If you go back to the map, you can see that the regions, will show you the map of these regions. Somewhere this region we have heard about. Many of Indian students were trained in some of the localities of the Ukraine region, Sumy, Kharkiv. The Kiev is the capital of the Ukraine. Many of this Donbas region, now the Mariupol, which is an international port located in the Ukraine, is now under the control of the Russia. Already Crimea, which is sharing the border with the Black Sea and the Azov Sea, now it already, which was under the control of the Russia in 2014, and Donbass, already there is a rebels which is supported by the Russia, is also ready to join with the Russia. So the Donbass region and Mariupol is one of the international port which give an access to this, the seas, the oceans. Now is under the control of the Russia. Almost the entire area is somewhat now loose, is under the control of the Russia. That's why the presidents of the Ukraine as demanding to the Russia to give back the Mariupol and leave the country and to ensure the peace of the regions. And in order to rescue or evacuate the Indian students, Indian medical students in this region, they were trained during this conflict. We have initiated a program called as Operation Ganga. So how many of you are familiar with Operation Ganga? Operation Ganga was the mission that India's evacuation program, that we have rescued all these Indian students from these conflicting regions to India back with the C-17, the Boeing of Indian Air Force. Through that, we have rescued all of them, so that it has affected the internal security in this region. The Russia is not supporting the Ukraine to become a member, and this is a conflict, a political conflict between the Russia and Ukraine. That's why they are attacking each other. Now, many of the regions in the Ukraine is now under most of the bare control of the Russia and Russian forces. So if any intervention is by any NATO or any country, it could be the chances of another world war. That's why any NATO member or European countries not interfere in this matter. If anybody is interfering in this matter, will be considered as an World War III. So that's why many of the countries avoid, especially the NATO member, also avoiding the intervention in this context, because we have seen that no-fly zone. The Ukraine was demanding to implement no-fly zone. So if there is a no-fly zone, any aircraft can fly over the Ukraine. So it can stop the airstrike by the Russia. So they were demanding a no-fly zone. But if the NATO member, if the NATO is implementing no-fly zone, again, it is an intervention in these matters, could be resulted into another third world war. That's why they are avoiding. So now both countries are ready for the peaceful talk and dialogue. Through that, they can expect a peaceful solution to this agreement. And in this, when they have annexed this region of this Crimea, also they had an agreement called as Minsk Peace Accords. The Minsk Peace Accord also signed between the Russia and Ukraine. in order to end the conflicts, especially in the region of Donbass. Donbass is also a region after the Crimea. They have a lot of conflict, which is again a sharing border with Russia and Ukraine. So in these border regions called as Donbass, so sometimes the questions can come. Donbass is located in, which is located in the Ukraine region. So they had an agreement earlier called as Minsk Peace Accord in order to end this armed conflicts between the two nations on Donbass regions. So now this is what the conflicts which resulted like between the Russia and Ukraine, mainly their accession to this NATO member. If, for example, if the Ukraine is becoming a member of the NATO, and Russia also fear that if the Ukraine is becoming a member of NATO, NATO will give the military assistance. So now the Crimea is a region, the provinces is under the control of the Russia. If the Ukraine is member of the NATO, with the assistance of the NATO, Ukraine will recapture the Crimea. So that means Russia may lose the Crimea region as well. So that way they are avoiding all the chances of they are like against all the chances of Ukraine becoming a member of the NATO. That's why they are warning or giving the sanctions against that. So if Russia also attack this Ukraine, and then US will come in interference of this matter, saying that we will announce lot of sanctions. And you have seen that Russia will say, if the European Council or European nations, if they do not lift the sanctions on Russia, we will collapse or we will break the international space stations. Then it is connected to the space science as well. So the International Space Station, an important topic for our prelims. Russia is part of that, the International Space Station. If the European nations also not lifting any sanctions on Russia, then Russia said that we will also collapse. We'll also try to like break or the collapse this International Space Station. That is again the Russia's response to this. So all the economic sanction, now many of the trade with the Russia also somewhere else reduced by all of these countries. And Russia is strong in energy trade, especially the clean energy trade with the European countries as well as other. It has finally affected because of the war in this Europe, the Eastern Europe, as well as the other securities issues in the West Asia has affected the oil prices, the oil supplies in the world. It has affected the increase in resulted into increase in the oil prices. Now we can see that oil prices has increased. It resulted into the inflation. Now India is also facing the problem of inflation, high inflations. That means all the prices of the commodities increasing. It will affect the common man. Then the monetary policy has to think about controlling this inflation. All this is connected. So the economy of the globe is affected by this Russia-Ukraine conflicts. So now the both countries are ready for the talk, but we can expect now the Ukraine also ready to withdraw its ambition to become a member, and it's now ready to talk with Russia, and they are talking on a region called as Mariupol. Mariupol is an international port. Again, another question we can expect, Mariupol is located in which country? The match, the pairs, the places in the news, that kind of question. I think we have given a lot of questions with regard to this, the places in the news, which in the context of the Russia, Ukraine, all these places which is near to this Ukraine region must be remembered. So the Mariupol is an important port city, a strategic international port city now under the control of Russia. The Ukraine is demanding to get it back to themselves, to the Ukraine. Now the Russia is not allowing. They are talking about the process. The peaceful dialogue is happening between the two. So neutrality for the Ukraine is the solution now. In order to ensure the success of the Ukraine, it has to be a neutrality. It has to maintain a neutrality. It should not affect the security of the Russia. That is what the context. And we have to go back in this context when the Russia-Ukraine conflicts. We can also expect the fact associated with this conflict, the history of the political conflict between the Russia and Ukraine. So it was the Cold War. After the World War II, the Soviet Union was sided with the Allied powers. Allied powers were the US, UK, and France. They are also getting support from the Soviet Union. And the opposition side was the Axis powers. They were the Nazis, Japan, and Austria. So they were the opposite side Axis powers. And we know that once the World War was over, the Germany or the Nazi Germany was completely defeated by the Allied powers. Now the end of Germany was left and over these allied countries has to decide who will control these German provinces. So the Soviet Union and allied countries went for a conference called as Yalta and Potsdam Conference in 1945, which was the year the World War was ended after the defeat of Nazi Germany in the World War II. So the Soviet Union was part of these allied countries, and allied countries along with the Soviet Union, they were discussing about the German territories. This Potsdam conference, which was held in Berlin. Berlin is a location of the Germany. In 1945, they held a conference and the US, UK, Soviet Union had to discuss in some of the matters with regard to the immediate administration of the defeated Germany. Who will administrate the defeated German provinces, and which area will be controlled by these nations like US, France, UK, and Soviet Union. And demarcation of the boundary of the Poland, occupation of the Austria, which are part of the Axis powers, the role of Soviet Union in the Eastern Europe. So the Eastern Europe, how the role of Soviet Union, all these matters were discussed in the Potsdam conference. Then what happened? You know that US has like attacked the Japan provinces of Hiroshima and Nagasaki through the atomic bomb, but it didn't given any information to the Soviet Union. That means US didn't inform any data or how the nature of the atomic bomb which was dropped on Japan. It didn't share anything with the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union leadership had a suspicion that the US does not share anything with the Soviet Union. So in future they may also attack the provinces like this if they have this much atomic power or nuclear power. So then the Soviet Union have a suspicion in that cases in supporting with allied countries. So they have made a Berlin blockade. That a Berlin blockade means a division between the Germany. You can see in the map. There was the Berlin. You have also heard about the Berlin Wall when we have studied about post-World War. The Eastern Germany, the Western Germany was the two division was there. The Eastern Germany of the Eastern Berlin was controlled by the Soviet. The Berlin blockade was made, like all the road and transport which connected to West and East was blocked by the Soviet Union, and which took at the control of the Soviet, and the remaining the West was controlled by the French, British, and American. It is also symbol of the division between the Berlin Wall was a symbol of the Cold War. The West, which is West Europe was control of the US allied powers, and then the Soviet Union in the other side, the Cold War. So the Berlin Wall is a symbol of the two Cold War happened. And finally, we know that towards the end of the 1980s or the 1990s, we have seen that the collapse of the Soviet Union, and after the Cold War entered, when the Berlin Wall also fell in that phase. Then the Cold War end, and the NATO, when we back to how the NATO was formed, this was the Cold War history because the Soviet Union was part of the allied powers. But when this context of the Berlin division of the Berlin or administration of the Germany, they had a difference of opinion, and because of that, Soviet Union has made a Berlin blockade, and finally it led to the Berlin Wall division. And the East Berlin was controlled by the Soviet Union, and West was shared with the French, British, and American.